Black representation in fashion. We've got two amazing heavy hitters joining us. They are really the best in the game. She's the founder and editor-in-chief of Fashion Bomb Daily, Claire Sulmers. Also with us is the legendary June Ambrose, fashion designer and stylist to the stars. Welcome to you both. You queens look fabulous. I have to start. Claire, my dear, who are you wearing?
Thank you.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. I'm wearing a designer called London Couture, established 1990. He's based out of Atlanta, Georgia.
Love it. June, my dear,
Nice.
you always give us a great hat. What else would you like to tell us about your look for today?
I mean, I'm wearing a black hat designer, milliner, Essentials, a guy named Rodney out of the Lower East Side. So, both Claire and I are avid believers in supporting young black talent. So, yes.
Claire, my dear, I'm so impressed with you. I always have been. I think it's so fantastic. You're a whole Harvard graduate, and then you made the transition brilliantly and beautifully into really being an iconic staple when it comes to modern fashion in general and in the culture. So tell us about the transition. I know at some point when you first launched Fashion Bomb Daily, it was kind of a side hustle. I know a lot of entrepreneurs start that way. You were full-time at Real Simple, but eventually now Fashion Bomb Daily is its own empire. Tell us about that pivot and how you went from side hustle to empire.
Right. So as you mentioned, I went to Harvard and majored in French and African American studies and studied under Henry Louis Gates and Cornel West. And in a lot of my courses, I learned about the unbalanced representations of people of color in the media. And I decided that I wanted to be the change I wanted to see in the world. So after I graduated, I did a series of internships in journalism, ultimately ended up at Real Simple magazine, but always knew that I wanted to work in fashion. And for whatever reason at the time, I kept hitting roadblock after roadblock. And so I decided to start a blog. And this was at a time when we would not see women of color on the cover of magazines. Black designers were not getting acknowledged. Stylists were not getting acknowledged, even though we were making the culture. People like June were out there making these revolutionary, iconic fashion moments. And while they were acknowledged in some ways, I feel like they weren't given their proper respect and due. And so it's been my mission through Fashion Bomb Daily to highlight our stories. And it has been 14 years since I started, and it went from a side hustle that I started at my job at Real Simple, and it's now become a force of its own.
So June, I know before the show we were talking about that iconic look you created for Missy Elliott in her video with the balloons, the trash bags. Right, I was saying we're getting vibes of it from Claire right now. Tell us some of your other favorite just videos or concerts that you worked on, June, over the years.
Well, definitely, I think the shiny suits that I did with Diddy and Mace, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that on Revolt.
Yes.
That was a whole other experience, and it was our first time working together, Puffy and I, on that level. So it was interesting. That was one of my favorites. Missy Elliott, I've done like almost every last one of her videos in her career, maybe except for 2 or 3. But like "Sock It To Me," "Hit 'Em With the Heat," "Busta Rhymes," "Pasta Cavassier," "Put Your Hands Where Your Eyes Can See," all the Jay-Z's videos. Recently, the concert on the Run tour, that was one of my favorites to design as well, because I got to put Jay in 11 looks, 11 changes for a man, an artist like himself on the road with Beyonce.
I want to ask you both this question, and you brought it up, Claire, about the limitations of how our people have been represented historically in culture. And particularly, I want to talk about Black women's representation, right? I also have a degree in Black Studies, Claire, from Chapel Hill, and I would never forget, I took a representation in media class my sophomore year, and they talked about the kind of tropes, the primary tropes for how Black women show up in these spaces, and we all know what they are. It's Mammy and Jezebel. They always want to reduce Black women to these hypersexual images or these totally asexual, non-desirable images. And so I want to ask you both about how your work just turns that on its head and just expands. And I'll start with you, June, because I think your work with Missy is a perfect example of it. Missy's look is so a part of her whole cultural impact.
Yes.
And I'd love to know what maybe some of the conversations you had with her were in terms of the story she wanted to tell and how she wanted to show up as a Black woman, unlike anything we've ever seen before or since.
Right. I think it's really important. That's a great question. It's a provocative question that we don't often have, because you have really super confident artists like Lizzo now, who has openly said because of Missy, she's able to be herself. And the thing with Missy Elliott was not about trying to fit into, a circle and she's a square peg. So it was really about allowing everyone else to conform and accept what they were seeing, and experience the creativity and the art, and knowing that it's more about the art form and less about the body parts. And being able to kind of, we never had to have the conversation about being over sexualized. That's a conversation I would have with Foxy Brown, in that time, in that era. But with Missy, the music was so strong, the music was so provocative, and it was really kind of trying to create a look that kind of matched that narrative.
Claire, I want to ask you, last year during Fashion Week, it was reported that it was the most diverse showing of fashion shows from the major fashion cities, Milan, Paris, the States, things like that. So it looked better. It looked more diverse, but y'all know that sometimes behind these labels, it's not that same diversity. So can you speak a little bit about your feeling on that, your reaction to that dichotomy or discrepancy, or for you, is it okay if the runway represents that first, and then the fashion houses themselves play catch up?
No, I think that the goal is for us to have true diversity and inclusion behind the scenes and on the scenes. And what I can say, just as a documentarian, a journalist, documenting this movement for the past 14 years, we have come a really long way. We still have a long way to go, but we have come a really long way when you think about, as you mentioned, the diversity in terms of designers who showed from Aliette, New York, to Fee Noel, Laquan Smith. When I first started covering Fashion Week, there were two shows. There was the Baby Fat show and the Tracy Reed show. And now we can count them on two hands. And then the beautiful news that we had the other day of the CFDA award winners, including Christopher John Roberts, Pierre Moss with Kirby Jean Raymond, and also Telfar. So there are wonderful things that are happening. Do we have a long way to go? Definitely. But I do see some signs of progress, and that's what keeps me encouraged. And it shows that the fashion industry, although they've been lagging behind a little bit from other industries, in my opinion, that we are making some progress, albeit slowly.
Claire, June, thank you both so much. The way you queens just beautifully represent the culture in the fashion industry. Truly, you elevate it. We thank you and we appreciate you. Now we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're getting into Black excellence in entertainment, and Justin Sylvester is going to help me out this week. We've got more Revolt Black news after this.